"Sir, please, could you just help me?" The voice cut through the hiss of rain and the impatient honking of a Manhattan morning. Gavin stopped mid-step, clutching the strap of his worn leather satchel as if it were his lifeline. He was already 20 minutes behind for the job interview that might finally pull him and Ellie out of the cycle of temp work and overdue rent. And there she was, Ava Sinclair. He didn't know her name yet, but everyone else on the street probably did. The woman in the tailored charcoal coat hair swept into a no-nonsense chignon, one heel wedged between the iron teeth of a subway grate. She was leaning down, trying to free it, muttering something sharp under her breath, glancing at the Rolex on her wrist like it was about to explode. "I'm fine. Just go," she said when she noticed him staring. The words came clipped, the kind people use when they're used to handling everything themselves. But the look in her eyes told another story, one Gavin recognized. The look of someone who didn't expect anyone to stop. "Hold on," he said, stepping toward her. Rain drummed against his shoulders. "You'll snap the heel clean off if you keep pulling like that." "I don't care if I have to crawl to my meeting," she bit back. "I'm late." Gavin dropped his satchel on the wet pavement and crouched, ignoring the cold seeping into his knees. "So am I," he muttered, wrapping both hands around the shoe and twisting the metal grate just enough for the heel to slip free. Her eyes widened. "You knew how to—" "Had a sister who used to get stuck in these things every Sunday after church," he said, handing the shoe back. "Learned the trick fast." She slipped it on, still balancing awkwardly, then straightened her coat. "You just missed your light," she said, nodding toward the crosswalk. "I'll catch the next one," he replied. And then, almost as an afterthought, "No one deserves to be left stuck like that." Something in his tone made her blink. But she didn't answer. She just hurried away, the sharp click of her heels fading into the noise of the city. By the time Gavin reached the towering glass lobby of Blake & Harper Consulting, his shirt clung damp to his back. The security guard barely looked up as he signed in. Upstairs, the receptionist glanced at the clock and gave him the kind of smile that wasn't a smile at all. "I'm sorry, Mr. Carter," she said. Voice syrupy but firm. "The partners have already begun the interviews. We can't reschedule. I was only—" He stopped. Excuses wouldn't matter. He glanced at the neat, intimidating list of candidates on her clipboard, last names that read like private schools and legacy wealth. People who didn't have to run through the rain in second-hand shoes. "Thank you for coming," she added, already turning to greet the next man in a perfectly tailored navy suit. Gavin stepped back into the hallway, each click of that man's polished shoes sounding like a door closing. That evening, the apartment smelled faintly of tomato soup and the crayons Ellie had left on the kitchen table. She was sitting cross-legged on the couch, pencil tucked behind her ear, a stack of note cards in her lap. "How'd it go, Dad?" she asked without looking up. He hung his jacket by the door, forcing a smile. "They went with someone else." Ellie finally looked at him, tilting her head in that way she had when she didn't buy what he was selling. "Or, you didn't get to tell them how awesome you are." Before he could answer, she shuffled her note cards and cleared her throat. "Okay, sir. This is a very serious interview. Why do you want this job?" He chuckled, dropping onto the couch beside her. "Because my boss is 9 and she eats all the good cereal." She rolled her eyes. "Try again, Mr. Carter." He met her gaze, that fierce, unblinking gaze far too old for her years. "Because I want to build a life where you never feel like you have to apologize for who you are." She pretended to jot something down. "A strong answer," she murmured, then set the cards aside and hugged him without warning. "You're still the best candidate, Dad." For the first time all day, the tightness in his chest eased. Across town, Ava Sinclair stood in the marble foyer of the Sinclair & Comey building, shaking rain from her umbrella. The deal was signed, the contract worth more than most people made in a lifetime. Yet her thoughts kept snagging on the stranger in the rain. No one deserves to be left stuck like that. It wasn't just what he'd said, it was how. No self-pity, no angle, just truth. Her assistant approached with a tablet full of numbers, but Ava waved her off. Later, she said, her voice softer than usual. The truth was, she couldn't remember the last time a man had helped her without expecting something in return. She didn't even know his name. but she remembered his eyes, and somehow she knew she wouldn't forget them. That night, as the city lights blinked in the rain-slick streets, Gavin lay awake listening to Ellie breathe. He had no idea the choice he'd made that morning, the choice that had cost him his one shot, had already started a chain of events neither of them could have predicted. And far above in her penthouse suite, Ava Sinclair found herself glancing out at the storm and wondering why for the first time in years she hoped to cross paths with a stranger again. The next morning, Gavin stood in front of the bulletin board outside the HR office, his hands deep in his pockets, pretending he wasn't looking at the thing that stung more than he cared to admit. There it was, the interview list for Blake and Harper's administrative position. Names that belonged to another world: Bradford Kensington IV, Amelia Worthington, Julian Devereaux. He didn't have to guess which ones wore tailored suits and spoke in a tone that made people lean in. Gavin Carter wasn't on that list anymore. One man, mid-30s, flawless navy suit, passed by and gave him the kind of smile you give a stranger on the subway, polite but distant. Gavin imagined him at the interview yesterday. Dry hair, perfect timing, maybe even a joke to charm the panel. Gavin had been 30 minutes late, shoes squeaking, rain dripping off his hair. No contest. He sighed and turned away. Across the city, Ava Sinclair sat at the head of a mahogany conference table finalizing follow-ups from the massive deal she'd signed the day before. Everyone around her buzzed with polite urgency, tossing around words like synergy and long-term positioning. But her mind was elsewhere. That man in the rain. The stranger who had stopped when no one else did. She'd built her life on speed and precision, signing million-dollar contracts, dismissing unnecessary distractions. And yet, she'd spent part of her morning replaying a single sentence in her head: "No one deserves to be left stuck like that." "Ms. Sinclair." Her assistant's voice broke through. Ava blinked. "Yes, you asked for the candidate list for the facility's contract position. It's ready." The irony wasn't lost on her. She took the folder without another word, her eyes scanning a list of names, none familiar. Not that she expected to see him. People like that didn't usually reappear, but some part of her hoped. That evening in their small apartment, Ellie was perched on the couch, knees tucked under her chin. On the coffee table sat a bowl of popcorn, a notebook, and the serious expression she wore whenever she was about to do something important. "Dad," she said as he kicked off his work boots. "Interview time." He raised an eyebrow. "Interview for what? Pretty sure the only job I've got is making dinner." She flipped open her notebook. "Mr. Carter, can you tell me why you think you're qualified to be—" "My dad." He froze mid-step, then chuckled. "Qualified, I've been holding the title for 9 years. Yes, but I'd like to review your performance." She tapped her pencil like a seasoned manager. "Strengths. Good at fixing squeaky doors, average at pancakes, exceptional at making up bedtime stories." She pretended to write furiously, then leaned in, her voice softening. "You're also really good at showing up, even when you're tired, even when you don't have to." The humor slipped for a moment. Gavin swallowed hard. "That's the job, kid." "No," she said, shaking her head. "That's love." He reached out and pulled her into a hug. Her small arms wrapped around his neck, strong for her size. "You know," he murmured, "I think you might be better at interviews than the real ones." She grinned. "That's because I already know the answer." The next day, fate, or something like it, played a quiet hand. A temp agency called with an offer: 1 week of evening janitorial work at a downtown high-rise. The pay wasn't much, but it covered the groceries. Gavin took it without hesitation. What he didn't know, at least not yet, was that the building's top floors belonged to Sinclair & Co. Ava stepped out of her chauffeured car in front of that same building later that evening. She had just returned from a tense investor dinner, her mind still circling over a clause in the contract she'd signed. As she passed the glass lobby, a flash of movement caught her eye, someone kneeling to wipe the marble floor wearing a gray janitor's uniform. She didn't think much of it. Not until a few seconds later, a little girl in a pink raincoat skipped into view, clutching a thermos and grinning like the whole world belonged to her. The man straightened, taking the thermos from her. His profile was unmistakable. It was him, the stranger from the rain. Before she could even process the thought, the little girl glanced up at her. "Aren't you the lady with the stuck shoe?" Ava froze. Her assistant, walking beside her, glanced between them in confusion. Gavin turned at the sound of his daughter's voice, his expression caught between surprise and an almost shy smile. "Ellie." But the little girl was already explaining. "My dad helped you in the rain." "You didn't say thank you." "Well, not really." The room seemed to tilt. Ava felt the heat rise to her cheeks, not something that happened often. "I suppose I didn't," she admitted, voice lower than usual. Her assistant cleared his throat. "Ms. Sinclair, the board is waiting." But Ava wasn't looking at him anymore. She was looking at Gavin, who simply said, "Wasn't expecting to see you here." She searched his face for any trace of smugness but found none. Only that same steady look he'd had in the rain. For reasons she couldn't name, she said, "Maybe we'll talk again." And then she turned toward the elevator, heart tapping a little too fast for her own liking. Far below, Ellie tugged on Gavin's sleeve. "She's pretty," she whispered. He gave a small, amused huff. "She's something." Ellie grinned knowingly. "I think she likes you." He ruffled her hair, shaking his head. "Don't start, kiddo." But later that night, as they walked home under the city's sodium glow, Gavin found himself replaying the way Ava Sinclair had looked at him in that moment, not like a janitor, not like a stranger, but like a question she wasn't sure she wanted answered just yet. It was one of those early spring afternoons in New York where the sun played tricks, bright light pouring between buildings but a wind sharp enough to cut through your coat. Gavin was on his knees in the 27th floor hallway of the Sinclair & Company Tower, scrubbing at a stubborn scuff on the polished marble. He'd taken the temp janitorial shift without thinking much of it. Work was work. Besides, Ellie liked coming along on the quieter evenings when she could do her homework at an empty lobby desk and pretend she was assistant to the boss. He didn't realize that today their path would take them straight to her. Ava Sinclair had just left a tense call with the board. Her heels clicked against the marble as she strode down the corridor toward the executive conference room, scanning through the last bullet points on her tablet. She was late, and she hated being late. From the corner of her eye, she caught a flash of movement, Ellie skipping toward the elevators, her pink cardigan swinging, clutching a lunchbox like it held state secrets. "Dad, where do I put this?" Ellie's voice floated back, followed by Gavin stepping into view wearing the gray janitor's uniform, hair tousled from the wind outside. Ava's steps faltered. She'd seen him last night, and the rain night before that. It was starting to feel less like coincidence and more like inevitability. Before she could speak, Ellie spotted her. Her eyes widened in recognition. "Oh, it's you, the lady with the shoe." The words echoed across the hallway. Ava froze mid-step. Two board members standing by the glass wall turned to look. Gavin straightened, shooting his daughter a gentle, warning look. "Ellie?" But Ellie was undeterred, voice full of 9-year-old clarity. "You remember, right? My dad helped you when your heel got stuck. You were in a hurry." Something in Ava's chest tightened, not from embarrassment alone, but from the faint shadow of guilt she'd been ignoring. She cleared her throat. "Yes, I remember." Her eyes flicked to Gavin. "You work here?" "Temporary contract," he replied simply, no apology in his tone. "Just trying to keep the lights on." Ellie grinned. "He's really good at it. The best." One of the board members coughed, clearly amused. Ava could feel the heat creeping up her neck. She wasn't used to being caught off guard, especially not by a janitor and his daughter in the middle of her own domain. Still, she said, "I don't believe I properly thanked you." Gavin gave a small shrug. "Didn't do it for thanks." The way he said it without an ounce of flattery made something flicker behind her eyes. But the elevator pinged and her assistant gestured urgently. "Perhaps we'll talk again," Ava said finally before stepping inside. As the doors closed, she caught Ellie's whisper. "She is pretty, right," followed by Gavin's low chuckle. That evening, in the quiet of the maintenance office, one of the senior janitors clapped Gavin on the shoulder. "Careful around the top floors," he said with a smirk. "People talk." Gavin frowned. "Talk about what?" The man shrugged. "Just saying. Folks don't like it when the worlds mix, especially her world." Gavin didn't reply, but the words stuck to him longer than he wanted to admit. Across the building, Ava sat in her private office, city lights sprawling out behind her. She told herself she was reviewing contracts, but the truth was she was replaying the hallway scene. The way Ellie's eyes had sparkled with that fierce, innocent loyalty. The way Gavin had met her gaze without flinching even in front of her peers. She remembered suddenly being 9 herself, standing in the marble foyer of her parents' mansion holding a trophy from a school debate competition and realizing no one in her family had bothered to attend. It was a memory she rarely let surface. But tonight it sat heavy. The next day, fate twisted the threads tighter. Gavin was pushing his supply cart down the executive wing when he heard Ellie's laughter echo from the reception area. He turned the corner to find her perched on one of the plush chairs, chatting with Ava, chatting like they'd known each other for years. "She says she's never eaten peanut butter out of the jar," Ellie announced, eyes wide with disbelief. Ava chuckled, a sound that startled Gavin more than it should have. "I haven't." "Should I?" Ellie nodded solemnly. "It's a life skill." Gavin stepped in. "Ellie, you're supposed to be reading, remember?" Ellie tilted her head. "I was." Then she came over and said hi. "You don't ignore CEOs. It's bad networking." Ava smiled faintly, but her gaze on Gavin lingered a beat too long. "Your daughter has a sharp mind." "She gets it from her mother," Gavin replied automatically before the air shifted slightly at the unspoken absence in the room. "Ellie, ever the bridge piped up? Maybe we could teach you peanut butter skills sometime." Gavin gave her a look, but Ava's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a no. Maybe, she said softly. What none of them noticed was the figure watching from the far end of the corridor, a sharply dressed senior VP expression unreadable. As Ava walked back toward her office, the whisper began its slow crawl through the building, the janitor and the CEO's sudden familiarity. And somewhere deep down, Gavin felt the faint tremor of a fault line forming one he knew could crack wide open if he wasn't careful. "Do queens ever get lonely?" Ava blinked. She had come down to the lobby for 5 minutes of quiet and a chamomile tea that her doctor insisted would be good for the headaches. The first thing she heard was the small, clear voice of a 9-year-old perched on the edge of a leather chair like a juror who had already reached a verdict. Ellie swung her feet, not quite touching the marble. "Because queens sit on really high chairs and sometimes nobody knows how to climb up there." Ava found herself smiling before she could stop it. "Depends on the queen." "What about you?" Ellie asked, eyes unblinking, guileless, and surgical all at once. Ava Sinclair, whose calendar had never had room for idle questions, actually hesitated. "I prefer good company to high chairs." "Good answer," Ellie said, satisfied. "My dad says high chairs are for toddlers." "Ellie." Gavin's voice carried from the revolving doors. He pushed the supply cart in with one hand, the other raised in apology. "Ms. Sinclair, I'm sorry if she's not," Ava said, surprising them both. "She's conversational." Ellie beamed. "That means interesting. Dad?" "I told you." Gavin parked the cart by the service corridor. "You're supposed to be reading." "I am reading," Ellie protested, patting her backpack. "People." Ava gave a soft huff that might have been a laugh. It felt unfamiliar and good, like opening a window that had been painted shut. "What are you learning that grown-ups talk around things?" Ellie answered instantly. Like when they want help, but they don't ask, or when they like someone, but they pretend they don't because they're busy being important. Gavin pinched the bridge of his nose. "We're going to talk about boundaries when we get home." Ellie leaned closer to Ava, stage whispering, "Boundaries is dad speak for stop being right in public." Ava's laugh escaped fully this time, bright and quick. Heads turned behind the reception desk. A few assistants exchanged looks as if they'd just seen a statue blink. Gavin shifted, suddenly aware of the density of the lobby, the security guards, the 2 interns waiting for badges, the senior VP from strategy standing by the column pretending not to watch. A small warning bell rang in the back of his mind. Different worlds. Same room. He stepped between the chair and the cart. "We should get upstairs." "Wait," Ellie said, digging in her backpack. She produced a tiny jar with a plastic spoon taped to it. Emergency peanut butter. For queens who don't have time for dinner. Ava stared at the jar, caught completely off guard. It's sealed, Ellie added quickly, dead serious, and I wiped the top with a disinfectant wipe because Dad says elevators are basically germ parties. Gavin's ears went red. Ellie. Ava accepted the jar as if it were a medal. Thank you. This might be the kindest thing anyone's handed me all week. She glanced at Gavin. You're raising a diplomat. More like a tiny union rep, he said dryly. She negotiates bedtime. I settle bedtime, Ellie corrected. Negotiation implies debate. Ava pressed her lips together to keep from laughing again. She wasn't used to this unarmored ease with a stranger's child, this feeling of being seen without being appraised. She set the jar gently in her bag like something fragile. Miss Sinclair. A clipped voice floated from the security desk. Marjorie Pike, Senior, VP Strategy Tailored Navy, sheath eyes like cold glass. Conference call in 7. Ava nodded. On my way. Marjorie's gaze flicked from the jar in Ava's bag to Gavin's uniform to Ellie's swinging feet. The smallest arch of an eyebrow. Message received. Ava felt the old armor try to climb back up her spine. She didn't let it. Not this time. Ellie, she said, softening the edges of her voice. Thank you for the company and the dinner insurance. You're welcome, Ellie said, then added with the gravity of a notary public, you should smile more. Your face gets prettier when it remembers. Ellie. Gavin again, mortified, amused, outnumbered. It's all right, Ava said, and it was. Sometimes I forget. She turned to go, then stopped. Mr. Carter, there's a children's book drive in the atrium tomorrow. Drop a list of Ellie's favorites with the reception. I'll make sure they're represented. Gavin's mouth opened-closed. You don't have to. I know, she said, and walked toward the elevators before he could decline a second time. Ellie watched the doors slide shut and then looked up at her father triumphant. See, not lonely. Gavin exhaled. Kid, you're playing chess while I'm still looking for the board. The rumor began 12 minutes later. That was how long it took Marjorie Pike to reach the 32nd floor step into the glass fishbowl of the strategy bullpen and say in a voice designed for plausible deniability, Has anyone noticed how accessible Ms. Sinclair's become? By the time it hit operations, the sentence had mutated. The CEO is socializing with staff in the lobby. By facilities with the janitor. By legal with a janitor and a child who brings her food. Gavin felt it first as static stares that lingered, a hushed conversation ending when he turned the corner with the mop bucket. He'd felt this before in other buildings, other lives, the gravity of assumption pulling decent moments out of shape. He kept his head down and worked. Soap water polish. The old rituals that always told the truth. Ellie, oblivious to adult weather systems, colored at the corner table, then popped up beside him. Dad, can queens come to regular people's houses? Why to learn peanut butter? He leaned on the handle, face softening. Let's not invite royalty into our rent-controlled palace just yet. She could sit on the floor, Ellie said practical. High chairs are for toddlers. He almost laughed, and then he didn't. Listen, Elle, people here, they live on different floors. Sometimes they don't like the stairs between them. Ellie considered this unpersuaded. Then they need better shoes, she said, as if the whole city could be fixed by cobblers and courage. Near closing, Ava reappeared at the lobby security desk. She'd made her calls, fought 2 fires, and signed a letter that would keep a satellite office open through summer. The chamomile had gone cold in its paper cup. Gavin was wiping down the brass rail by the revolving doors. He didn't look up until she was close enough to smell the rain in her hair. I thought of a rule, she said. He frowned, wary and amused. A rule. For queens, she said deadpan. Accept emergency peanut butter, and don't ignore the people who keep your castle clean. He looked at her, then really looked, and something wry and warm creased the corner of his mouth. I'll second that. Ava leaned against the rail just for a moment. I don't have many people who talk to me like people. Occupational hazard, he said. Power makes everyone's sentences weird. A corner of her lip lifted. And what do you do with weird sentences? Translate, he said simply, into actions. A beat. The lobby hummed around them. Two worlds balanced on the same square tile. Ms. Sinclair, Marjorie's voice again nearer this time. The London call moved up. We'll need you upstairs. Coming, Ava replied, but didn't move right away. She glanced toward Ellie, who was making an origami crown out of a receipt. She's luminous. Yeah, Gavin said softly, the word full of history. She keeps the lights on. Marjorie's gaze swept the scene. Ava relaxed the janitor, unflustered the child. Folding paper royalty and something like disdain clicked into place. She turned sharply on her heel. Ava pushed off the rail. Good night, Mr. Carter. Good night, Ms. Sinclair. As she walked away, Ellie called after her. Don't forget the jar. Ava lifted her bag. Not a chance. Upstairs, Marjorie fell in step beside her. With respect, Ava, optics matter. Kindness isn't a scandal, Ava said without looking over. It can be spun into one. Ava stopped. The hallway's glass threw their reflections back at them, two women in different kinds of armor. So can cruelty, she said quietly. Which one do you want to be seen practicing? Marjorie pressed her lips together, said nothing, and moved on. Ava stood alone. A beat longer, the city stretched out like circuitry beneath the windows. In her bag, the emergency jar knocked lightly against her phone, a childish, homely sound that somehow steadied her. Downstairs, Gavin steered the cart toward the service elevator. He could feel the rumor beginning to gather like weather over the building. He could also feel something else small, inconvenient, bright as a match in wind. Ellie slipped her hand into his. Did we do a good thing today? We did a decent thing, he said. That's harder to argue with. She nodded, satisfied. Tomorrow, I'll bring crackers. Peanut butter needs friends. Gavin laughed under his breath, and the sound followed them into the elevator. The doors slid shut on the lobby's polished sheen, and the tiny crown Ellie had left on the chair sat glowing in the lamplight paper fragile, impossible to ignore. The first thing Gavin noticed when he walked into the apartment that night was the silence. Not the peaceful kind, the kind that hummed like a power line before it snaps. Ellie sat cross-legged at the small kitchen table, her coloring book untouched. She was staring at an envelope. Thick, expensive paper, no return address. Where did you get that? Gavin asked, setting his keys in the chipped bowl by the door. A man dropped it off, she said, eyes still on the envelope. He knew your name. He said, tell your dad the past doesn't stay buried. Gavin froze. For a moment, the hum in the air became a roar in his ears. He took the envelope, weighed it in his hand. Did you let him in? His voice was too sharp. Ellie shook her head. Mrs. D'Amato from 3B was in the hall. She didn't like his shoes. Gavin managed a ghost of a smile at that, then tore open the flap. Inside, 2 photographs. The first him 10 years younger in a suit shaking hands with a man in front of a construction site. The man was now serving a federal sentence for fraud. The second, a grainy shot of him outside the courthouse after the trial. And next to him, Ava. Or, rather, Ava, much younger, hair pulled back in a severe knot, standing beside her father. The note, scrawled beneath, read, Funny how circles close. Gavin sat down hard. Dad Ellie's voice was small. Is that the Queen? He slid the photos back into the envelope. It's just an old story, one that didn't end well. Ellie frowned. Then maybe it needs a different ending. He looked at her, wondering how someone so small could make the simplest sentences feel like instructions. The next day, the lobby buzzed with the kind of tension that didn't have a name yet. Gavin kept his head down, mop moving, and practiced arcs, but the static was thicker now. When Ava stepped out of the elevator, every conversation on the mezzanine seemed to pause for one breath too long. Mr. Carter, she said, her tone warmer than the marble underfoot. Could I see you for a moment? He followed her to a quiet alcove near the side entrance. She waited until the door closed behind them before speaking. Someone's been asking about you, she said. He met her eyes. Someone's been asking about you, too. A flicker of surprise. You got something? He pulled the envelope from his jacket and handed it to her. She scanned the photos, her expression hardening in increments. "My father," she said quietly, tapping the edge of the younger Ava photo. This was the groundbreaking for the Whitestone Project, before it went under. And before he testified against 3 of his own executives, Gavin added, "I was a site foreman, caught in the middle. They needed someone to blame for the missing funds. You took the fall. I took the hit," he corrected. "There's a difference. Fall means you didn't see it coming. Hit means you knew and you braced." For a moment her gaze softened, but then she straightened. This could get messy. He almost smiled. "Messy for you or for me, both," she admitted. That afternoon, Marjorie Pike intercepted Ava outside the boardroom. "We need to talk about Carter," she said low and urgent. Ava kept walking. "We're not in the business of condemning people for surviving bad chapters." Marjorie quickened her pace. "We're in the business of protecting the company from scandal. This envelope floating around, it's a prelude. Someone's trying to tie you to him for a reason." Ava stopped at the glass wall the city reflected behind her like an ocean. "Then let's find the reason before they write it for us." Later in the service corridor, Gavin found Ellie sitting on an upturned bucket sketching. She held up the paper, 2 castles connected by a wooden bridge and a tiny figure in the middle carrying a jar of peanut butter like a royal offering. "What's this?" he asked. "It's you," she said matter-of-factly. "You're the bridge." He crouched down, throat tight. "Bridges get walked on, you know. Only if they don't move," she countered. From the far end of the hall, Ava appeared. She'd changed into a navy coat, hair loose, eyes sharper than this morning. "I think we might have a lead," she said to Gavin, "on whoever's stirring this up." Ellie looked between them. "Is this the part where you 2 go fight the dragon?" Ava smiled faintly. "Something like that." They met that night in a corner booth at a diner 3 blocks from the building. It smelled like coffee and old vinyl seats. Ava slid a file folder across to him. Inside, copies of internal memos signed off by Marjorie approving an audit of both their backgrounds without board consent. "She's digging for leverage," Ava said. "And using my past to get to you," Gavin replied. The waitress topped off their coffee without asking. For a moment, the clink of the pot was the only sound. "You could walk away," Ava said finally. "No one would blame you." "I've walked away before," Gavin said, eyes steady. "It doesn't fix the bridge." Something in her expression shifted just enough for him to see the woman behind the CEO mask. "You know," she said softly, "most people don't stand still when the storm comes." "Storm's coming, whether you stand still or not," he answered. "Might as well face it." When they stepped back out into the night, the air was cold enough to sting. Gavin looked down the street toward their separate corners of the city. Ava was already pulling her coat tighter when Ellie's voice echoed from the curb Mrs. D'Amato had walked her over from the apartment. "I wanted to see the Queen," Ellie said, bouncing on her toes. "And give her this." She handed Ava a small, folded note. Ava unfolded it. In blocky pencil letters it read, "Even dragons get tired. That's when you win." Ava glanced at Gavin, her breath visible in the streetlight. "You have an uncanny co-strategist. She doesn't work for free," Gavin said dryly. "She charges in crackers." Ellie grinned, utterly unbothered by the night's undercurrents. For the first time in a long time, Ava felt the ground under her feet, not the polished marble of power, but something real. And somewhere deep down she suspected the bridge had already started to build itself. The hallway smelled faintly of disinfectant and chalk dust, an odd mix that always clung to elementary schools. Gavin's shoulders were squared, but Ellie's little hand felt unusually heavy in his. She wasn't chattering the way she usually did after school. She was silent. He stopped just outside the door. Ellie. "What happened?" She kept her eyes on the floor. "It's nothing." The nothing broke him faster than a sob. Gavin crouched his hands gently holding her arms. "Sweetheart, I can't help if I don't know." Her lip trembled. "Some kids. They said you clean toilets for rich people." And they laughed. "One of them dumped my lunch in the trash." Gavin's jaw tightened, but his voice stayed steady. "And what did you do? I told them you fix things." that you fix people's messes too, but they said, "That's just what a janitor does." The words came out small but sharp enough to wound. Before he could answer, a clear, measured voice came from behind. "And did you tell them your dad is the kind of man who'd give up everything to help someone he doesn't even know?" They both turned. Ava stood at the end of the hall, her heels clicking softly as she approached. Today, her hair was swept into a severe knot, her tailored coat pristine, but her eyes, they weren't cold. They were steady, almost protective. Ellie tilted her head. "Hi, Miss Shoe Lady." A smile, genuine unguarded, flickered across Ava's lips. "Hello, Ellie." She crouched to meet her gaze. "Listen to me. There's nothing wrong with what your father does. The world can't stand without people who care enough to keep it together. Those kids, they don't understand yet. But they will." Gavin straightened his voice low. "Thanks, but..." She cut him off, still looking at Ellie. "And you? You're already braver than most grown-ups. Don't you forget that." Ellie's eyes glimmered, but she nodded. A teacher's voice called from down the hall, and Ellie ran off to fetch something from her locker, leaving Gavin and Ava alone in the quiet corridor. Gavin crossed his arms not in defiance, but as if holding something in. "I appreciate what you said, but we don't need saving. I wasn't trying to..." He met her gaze unflinching. "We need someone who believes we can stand. On our own. Not someone who thinks we can't without them." The silence between them stretched taut, but not hostile. Ava's voice softened, almost a whisper. "Maybe I'm just tired of watching good people get knocked down and never get back up." He looked at her, then really looked, and saw a flicker of something raw beneath the polished armor. Then, maybe the trick is to help without taking away their fight. A sound from the doorway broke the moment, Ellie holding a crumpled piece of paper. "I drew you something, Miss Ava." She handed over a small sketch, 3 stick figures holding hands under a big yellow sun. Ava studied it for a beat too long. "This is beautiful. Can I keep it?" Ellie beamed. "You have to. It's a rule. If someone gives you sunshine, you don't throw it away." Gavin chuckled, shaking his head. "She's 9, going on 40. They walked out together, the afternoon sky heavy with an oncoming storm. Outside, Ava's driver waited, but she lingered by the school steps. "For what it's worth," she said, "those kids, one day they'll wish they'd sat at your lunch table." Ellie grinned. "Too late. My table's full." Gavin gave Ava a polite nod, but something in his eyes had shifted, less guarded, though still cautious. As Ava slid into her car, she glanced back through the rain-flecked window. Gavin stood with Ellie under his worn umbrella, her small hand clutching his arm, both of them framed against the gray. She realized with a start that for the first time in years, she wasn't thinking about contracts or numbers or deadlines. She was thinking about that umbrella, that man, and the way the little girl's laughter seemed to echo long after the car pulled away, and she wondered, half curious, half afraid, what it would feel like to stand under it too. The rain came down in sheets, turning the streetlights into blurred halos. Gavin's boots splashed through shallow puddles as he guided Ellie under his umbrella, the plastic grocery bag in his other hand rustling against the wind. They were halfway home when a sleek black car loomed ahead. Hazard lights blinking. The hood was up, and standing beside it, coat pulled tight against the rain, was Ava. For a second, Gavin wondered if this was some surreal trick of the weather, but then she looked up, and even through the curtain of rain he caught the sharp flash of recognition in her eyes. "Ava." His voice carried equal parts surprise and caution. She sighed, giving the stalled car a look of disgust. "Dead battery. My driver's in the next block trying to find help. And my phone's," she held it up, dark screen, "as useless as this car right now." Ellie peered from under the umbrella. "You can come with us. Dad makes the best grilled cheese in the whole city." Gavin hesitated. "Ellie, it's fine." Ava cut in her tone, lighter than he'd expected. "If you're offering..." "I won't say no. Standing here in heels is starting to feel like some sort of corporate punishment." Minutes later, they stepped into the small warmth of Gavin's apartment. The scent of old wood and faint coffee hung in the air. It wasn't much, 2 small rooms and a kitchen, but it felt lived in. Ellie dropped her backpack and darted to the cupboard. "Grilled cheese emergency," she announced, pulling out bread and cheese. Ava removed her coat, revealing a simple navy dress that somehow still looked like it belonged in a magazine. She glanced around, taking in the mismatched mugs, the scuffed counter, the way the kitchen table bore faint scratches from years of elbows and homework. Gavin busied himself at the stove. "I should warn you, we're not exactly five-star dining." Ava leaned against the counter watching him. "Sometimes 5 stars just means 5 layers between you and the person across the table." He glanced over his shoulder, a faint smile tugging at his mouth. "And sometimes 1 layer is all you can afford." Ellie, oblivious to the undercurrents at the table with 2 plates, then ran back for a third. "Dad, don't burn it like last time." "I didn't burn it. I made it. Extra crispy." Gavin defended, flipping the sandwiches with exaggerated care. The 3 of them sat down, steam rising from the plates. For a while, the only sound was the rain against the window and Ellie's enthusiastic chewing. "This is—" Ava paused as if searching for the right word. "Exactly what I didn't know I needed tonight." Gavin raised a brow. "A grilled cheese." She met his gaze, and there was something softer there than he'd ever seen. "No, this. Sitting at a table without talking about mergers or profit margins, eating something made by someone who didn't order it from a caterer." Ellie tilted her head. "You can come back, you know. Even if your car's fine next time." Gavin cleared his throat, but Ava's lips curved. "I might just take you up on that." They lingered over dinner longer than necessary. The conversation drifted from the absurd Ellie's theory that grilled cheese was a form of magic to the personal. Ava admitted she hadn't cooked a meal in years. Gavin told the story of Ellie's first attempt at pancakes, which had ended in something resembling concrete. By the time Ava's driver knocked on the door, the rain had softened to a gentle patter. She stood in the doorway, coat back on, but her eyes lingered on the warm glow of the small kitchen behind Gavin. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for the food, and for not making it feel like I was intruding. You weren't?" "Gavin," replied, his voice steady, but his eyes holding hers a moment too long. Ellie darted forward to hug her. "Next time, bring marshmallows." Ava laughed, a clear, unguarded sound that seemed to catch even her off guard. She stepped into the hall, and Gavin closed the door behind her, the scent of rain and faint perfume still lingering. Ellie turned to him with a knowing look only a 9-year-old could pull off. "You like her?" Gavin busied himself with stacking plates. "She's different. Different good," Ellie declared, climbing into her chair again as if to make the thought permanent. Gavin didn't answer. But as the rain outside faded to a whisper, he found himself wondering when different had started to feel so much like necessary. The subject line hit like a slap. "Blind item, which Ice Queen CEO is slumming for sympathy." It was in everyone's inbox by 9:03 a.m. A gossip blast from a whispery industry culture newsletter that thrived on innuendo and interns with loose tongues. The copy fizzed with poison. She dines in staff apartments, brings a child as a prop, and lets a custodial Casanova escort her home. Philanthropy or PR. By 9:10, the security desk was buzzing. By 9:20, someone had printed it and taped it to the break room fridge. By 9:30, Marjorie Pike swept into Ava's office with the page between 2 fingers as if it might stain her suit. "Optics," she said, dropping it on the desk like a verdict. "You need distance? Now." Ava didn't flinch. She read the lines once, twice. Something knotted behind her ribs, not shame, not quite anger, something with both their teeth. "It's a lie," she said evenly, "and a lazy one." Marjorie folded her arms. "It doesn't matter if it's lazy, it sticks. We have the Sinclair Foundation benefit tonight, press donors' cameras. One wrong glance and we're writing checks to put out fires for a month. So, what do you suggest?" "You don't interact with him publicly," Marjorie said. "At all. No smiles, no soft eyes. If he shows up to work service, you direct him to facilities. Keep it sterile." Ava stared at the skyline for a long beat, the city glittering like a dare. "Sterile," she echoed. "People aren't Petri dishes. People are headlines," Marjorie replied. Decide which one you want to be." Gavin heard it in the worst way, secondhand sideways. A forklift driver in the loading bay muttered, "Tough break, man," and slid his phone across the pallet. The blind item blinked back at him with its oily certainties. He didn't say much. Didn't have to. Men who survive storms know when to spend words and when to save them. He pushed the crate of easels toward the freight elevator and kept moving. Ellie felt it before anyone explained it. In the lobby, she tugged his sleeve. "Why are people looking like you spilled something?" "Because I didn't," he said gently. "And that bothers them." She studied his face, small diplomat assessing damage. "Do we still go to the book benefit? We set it up," he said. "We'll be done before the fancy part starts." "Okay," she said. "But if anyone is mean, I will use my outside voice." He smiled at that despite himself. "Let's hope we don't need it." By 6 o'clock, the atrium looked like a promise. Strings of warm lights, paper stars hung from mezzanine rails, stacks of brand-new children's books ribboned in navy and gold. A string quartet tuned in one corner. Champagne whispered into flutes. The Sinclair Foundation banner arced over the stage like a polished halo. Gavin finished adjusting the mic stand, checked the cables, then wheeled his cart toward the side corridor. He was almost clear when a donor's laugh snagged him. Adorable, really, a woman in sequins trilled to her circle, like bringing the help home for show and tell. Gavin didn't turn. He didn't have to. He felt the sentence like grit in his teeth. Then Ellie's small hand slid into his, grounding him. "Remember?" she murmured, as if repeating a rule they'd invented. "If someone gives you ugly, you don't have to wear it." "Yeah," he said softly. "Yeah." Ava stepped onto the stage as the room filled luminous and composed in a simple black dress. For a second, her eyes found the side corridor where Gavin stood half-shadowed and flickered. Not a smile, not yet. A recognition. Her remarks began crisp, precise. Childhood literacy. Neighborhood libraries. The way a book in a child's hands becomes a lever under a life. She was good at this, setting a room on its feet with a language built like scaffolding. Then the question came. A reporter at the back, late 20s, hungry jawline, lifted a hand during the casual Q&A. "Ms. Sinclair," he called before tonight's event. Our outlet received a tip alleging unusually close ties with a member of your custodial staff. Do you want to clarify the nature of that relationship for your donors? The room twitched. Heads turned like a flock. Marjorie's focus sharpened to a blade. Now her posture ordered. Ava's answer took a heartbeat too long. In that beat, choice roared through her. The person she had spent a decade becoming, and the person quietly blooming beneath that armor, reached for the same mic. "We keep our focus on the cause," she said at last, voice cool, "and we maintain professional standards. Facilities will remain in the service areas for the remainder of the evening." A dozen things moved at once. The quartet stilled. A camera shutter snapped. Marjorie's chin tilted a millimeter in triumph. And in the side corridor, Gavin's face changed in a way most people would have missed. Not anger, not even surprise. Just a quiet door closing somewhere far inside. Ellie's fingers tightened. "Dad, it's okay," he said. "Work first." They eased backward into the service hall. As they passed the security post, one guard, new kid, too eager, gestured with his chin. "Facilities that way, sir." Gavin nodded, kept moving. Ellie looked over her shoulder at the stage where Ava continued like nothing had cracked. He finished his shift on autopilot, breaking down boxes, signing off the delivery manifest, coiling cables, with the neat care of a man who calms himself by making order. Ellie sat on an empty crate nearby, small face arranged in the serious patience of a child trying not to be in the way. When they pushed through the exit to the rainy alley, the city felt louder. They were almost to the corner when a voice cut through. "Gavin, wait." Ava stood under the loading dock awning, rain pinning her hair to her temples, damp halo around the edges of what had been perfection inside. He stopped. Ellie did too, half behind him, half peeking. "I need to explain," Ava began. The words were measured, but the breath behind them wasn't. Inside that room. Eyes turned stories into weapons. I had to protect the brand he finished for her. No bitterness, just a statement of physics. I get it. That's not all I— It's enough, he said gently, and that hurt her more than any sharpness would have. Look, Ms. Sinclair. I didn't get here by needing anyone to vouch for me. Tonight reminded me of that. Rain ticked against metal. She took a small step closer. I'm not ashamed of having dinner at your table. Then don't be, he said, but don't ask me to pretend I was never there. Ellie doesn't do pretend when it comes to people. At her name, Ellie stepped forward, chin up in that fearless way she had. It hurt, she said simply. When you said he had to stay in the back. Ava closed her eyes as if the truth were a light she'd been avoiding. When she opened them, something in her had shifted less hauteur, more human. I'm sorry, she said to Ellie first. I said the right thing for the wrong reason. Ellie considered this. You can fix it, she said. You fix things with the next thing you do. Ava almost smiled. Who taught you that? My dad. Ellie said. He fixes people's messes. Gavin squeezed his daughter's shoulder. We should head home, he said, not unkind, to Ava. Take care of your event. It matters. He turned. Ellie did too. They walked into the wet neon hum umbrella blooming like a small night sky over their heads. Ava didn't call them back. She stood in the rain long enough to feel it soak through the careful fabric of her dress, long enough to understand that a rumor hadn't truly burned her fear had. And fear, when fed, always asks for seconds. At home, Gavin set the kettle on. The apartment felt different, same walls, new echo. Ellie sat at the table drawing with fierce concentration. After a while, she slid the page toward him. 3 stick figures again. This time, the middle one had an umbrella. The figure on the right, the tall one, stood just outside the curve of its shelter. Raindrops dotted her dress. A caption in blocky letters read, Bring her in, or build her one. He laughed, a broken little sound that fixed itself on the way out. You're bossy, he said. I'm accurate, she replied, not looking up. He glanced toward the window where the city blinked back like a tired, beautiful thing. We're going to give her space, he said, for a while. Ellie's pencil paused. Are we mad? No, he said after a beat. We're reminded. Reminded of what? That some bridges don't hold until both sides want to cross. Ellie nodded slowly, as if filing it under the rules of being a person. Okay, but I'm keeping her sunshine picture on the fridge. Good, he said. Some things you don't throw away. Back at the atrium, the quartet resumed. Donors drifted back to laughter. Marjorie watched Ava towel her hair in the green room and thought for the first time that the ice might finally be cracking where she could control it. But on the inside of her wrist, Ava felt Ellie's words like a pulse. You fix things with the next thing you do. She set the towel down, lifted her chin, and walked back toward the lights, conscious of every step of every story she would choose to write from here. Outside, rain braided the city into silver threads. Under one small umbrella, 2 figures kept walking. And for the first time all day, the rumor felt far away loud in other people's mouths, quiet in the place where the future waits its turn. The storm came without warning, one of those late autumn tempests that turned New York streets into rivers and made the skyline vanish into a curtain of rain. By nightfall, the wind howled against the glass walls of Sinclair Tower, and the city below flickered with power outages like a dying constellation. Gavin had drawn the short straw for the night shift. He told himself it was better this way, better to keep moving, to keep his mind off the look Ava had given him at the gala, the one that had felt like a door quietly closing. Ellie, stubborn as ever, had begged to come along. It's a storm, Dad. You can't face it alone, she'd said with that mix of sincerity and mischief that made saying no impossible. He relented, packing her sketchbook and a thermos of hot chocolate. By 8 p.m., the tower groaned under the wind. Somewhere in the building, the lights flickered once, twice, and then everything went dark. Ava had stayed late in her top-floor office, finishing a proposal meant to undo some of the damage the rumors had caused not to Gavin's career, but to her own conscience. She was headed down when the elevator jolted violently between floors. The sudden stop made her stumble. Then in the darkness she heard a small, quick gasp. Ava. The voice was tentative, almost trembling. Ava blinked into the emergency light that clicked on overhead, bathing the elevator in a dim orange glow. There she was, pressed into the corner, clutching her sketchbook to her chest. "What are you doing here?" Ava asked gently. "I came with Dad. He's working. I was just going down to find him. Then this happened." For a moment, neither spoke. The wind moaned through the elevator shaft. Ava could feel the air grow stale, the weight of the storm pressing from all sides. "You're not scared of storms, are you?" she asked. Ellie shook her head, but her eyes betrayed her. "Not storms. Being stuck." Ava crouched down, knees protesting in her heels. "You know I used to hate storms, too. When I was little, I'd hide in my closet with a flashlight. My mom, well, she wasn't the hiding type. She let out a breath that was almost a laugh. She said fear was a waste of time, but I think sometimes being afraid is just being human." Ellie studied her for a long beat. "So, what did you do when you were scared I found something to hold on to?" Ava hesitated, then extended her hand. "Will this do?" The girl's small fingers curled into hers, warm and certain. Minutes stretched. Ava searched for something, anything, to make the moment feel less like waiting for a rescue and more like choosing to be here. "You like music?" she asked. Ellie nodded. "Dad plays the guitar sometimes. He's not very good at it." Ava smiled, then began to hum softly a tune she hadn't touched in years. The melody was fragile at first, the kind of thing you almost forget, until it rises up from somewhere deep. "What song is that?" Ellie asked, eyes heavy now. "It's called Someone to Watch Over Me," Ava murmured. "My grandmother used to sing it when the power went out. Said it made the dark feel less empty." Her voice was unpolished but steady. The words wrapped around the small space, smoothing the edges of fear until Ellie's eyelids drooped. The sound of metal groaning above signaled that help was near. Moments later, the hatch opened and a flashlight beam swept through. Ellie Gavin's voice cut through the dim, rough with worry. He dropped to his knees, his hand reaching down before the rescue crew had even anchored the ladder. Ellie stirred, blinking up at him. "We were fine, Dad," Ava sang to me. Gavin looked from his daughter to Ava, the emergency light catching the sharp planes of his face, softening them in the same moment. For a second, no one moved. Rain hammered against the building, the kind of relentless noise that usually erased anything delicate. But here between the three of them, something fragile held. When they were finally out in the hallway, Gavin set Ellie down but kept a steadying hand on her shoulder. "You okay?" he asked Ava quietly. She met his gaze without the guardedness she'd worn for weeks. "Better than okay. A beat." "Gavin, about the other night." "You don't owe me an explanation," he said. But there was no edge to it, only a tired sincerity. "Maybe not," she admitted, "but I owe you the truth, and I think I'm ready to see it." Something unspoken passed between them, a ceasefire neither had planned for offered, not in words but in the way their eyes didn't look away. Ellie yawned loudly, cutting through the moment. "So, can we go home now?" They both laughed, quiet, unexpected, and real. That night, as Gavin carried his daughter through the rain to the car, Ava stood under the awning watching them. She realized with a clarity that startled her that storms didn't just trap you. Sometimes they showed you exactly where you belonged. And for the first time in a long while, Ava wasn't entirely sure she wanted the elevator to move again. By morning, the storm had passed, but its echoes lingered. New York was washed clean, the streets gleaming under a pale winter sun. Inside Sinclair Tower, though the air was far from clear. Ava stepped out of the elevator with a look that turned heads. Her heels struck the marble with an unhurried rhythm, measured, deliberate, dangerous. It was the kind of walk that made people step aside even before they knew why. She had spent most of the early morning replaying the night in her mind, Ellie's small hand in hers, Gavin's voice calling out in the dark the weight of the truth she had been avoiding. It had crystallized into something sharp. She had been wrong, and she would not allow that wrong to stand another day. Marjorie, her senior VP, was in the conference room when Ava entered. The woman's perfectly styled hair and crisp navy suit didn't hide the flicker of surprise. "Ava wasn't expecting you so early." Clearly, Ava replied, her voice calm but laced with steel. She dropped a printed file onto the table. "Recognize." This Marjorie glanced at the pages, feigning disinterest. "HR records I don't see. It's the email thread you sent to 3 department heads suggesting that Gavin was, what was your phrase, manufacturing interactions with me for career advancement." The silence stretched. Outside, the hum of the city was muted, like even the traffic was waiting. "You can't be serious," Marjorie said finally. "It was office talk. Everyone repeated what you started." Ava cut in. "You turned a man's integrity into your weapon because you couldn't stomach me treating a janitor like a human being. Do you have any idea what that cost him?" Marjorie's eyes hardened. "It's not about him. It's about you. The board doesn't respect a CEO who blurs lines with staff." Ava leaned forward, voice low enough to be lethal. "The board respects results. And right now, they're going to see the result of you undermining my authority, my team, and my trust. Pack your office." Word spread fast. By the time Ava reached the main floor, whispers trailed behind her like a shadow. She ignored them. She knew exactly where she was going. She found Gavin in the lobby mopping near the wide glass doors. He looked up when she approached, his expression unreadable. "You're early," he said. "I needed to see you. That so?" His voice was polite but distant. She hesitated. This was the hard part, the part where pride had to die so truth could breathe. "I found out who started the rumor. It was Marjorie. She's gone." Gavin stilled mop handle in hand. Why now? The question landed between them like a stone. Ava met his eyes unflinching. "Because last night in that elevator, I realized I've been blind. I saw you with Ellie, really saw you, and it hit me. You've been exactly who you are from the start. I'm the one who didn't believe it." He searched her face, looking for cracks for the part where she might still be the woman who'd turned away at the gala. "I don't want to thank you," he said quietly. "You're not getting one," she replied, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "You're getting the truth. And the truth is, I respect you more than anyone in this building." Ellie's laughter carried from across the lobby. She was showing her sketchbook to the security guard, pointing to a page that made them both grin. Gavin glanced over the edges of his expression, softening. "You know, Ava said your daughter's a better judge of character than most CEOs I know." "She doesn't care about resumes," Gavin replied. "She just knows when someone's real, and she decided I'm real. She decided you're trying." Ava let out a breath, a mix of relief and something she couldn't quite name. "Then maybe there's hope for me yet." That afternoon, Ava called an all-staff meeting. The entire company gathered in the atrium, the glass walls letting in swaths of pale sunlight. She stood at the front, not as the Ice Queen, but as something closer to herself. "Rumors can destroy careers," she began, her voice carrying without force. "They can also destroy trust. I allowed that to happen here. That ends today. No one in this company will be judged by their title, their uniform, or the size of their paycheck. We rise or we fall together." There was a moment of stillness, then applause. It wasn't thunderous, but it was real. Gavin stood at the edge of the crowd, saying nothing, but his eyes met hers. This time, neither looked away. Later, as people dispersed, Ava crossed the room toward him. "There's an event this weekend," she said. "Community outreach. I'd like you and Ellie to come." "What for?" She hesitated, then said, "Because I think you might like the people there, and because I'd like you there." Gavin studied her for a long moment, then nodded once. "We'll think about it," Ava smiled. "That's all I'm asking." As he watched her walk away, Gavin felt the faintest shift, like the city itself had inhaled after holding its breath too long. He didn't know what the weekend would bring, but for the first time in weeks, he wanted to find out. The atrium had never looked like this, less a lobby, more a neighborhood. Paper lanterns hung in soft constellations. Long tables were piled with backpacks, library cards, and stacks of brand-new paperbacks tied in navy ribbon. On the far side, a mobile clinic checked vision for kids who hadn't had the chance. On the near side, a corner stage waited beneath a banner that read, "The Bridge Fund Scholarships for Working Families." Gavin stood by the railing with Ellie watching volunteers bustle. For the first time since the rumor, the building felt honest. You could hear it in the way people spoke with their hands in laughter that belonged to no one's title. "You okay?" he asked. Ellie nodded, eyes bright. "This place needed stickers," she said, pointing to the reflective stars she'd convinced the security team to hand out. "Now it has them." Hattie appeared with a clipboard and a grin. "You two are on sunshine duty," she said, pressing a sheet of smiley face stickers into Ellie's small palm. "Official title." Ellie saluted solemnly. "I accept this responsibility." They were still smiling when Ava stepped onto the stage's side stairs. She wore no armor tonight, no severe bun, no Ice Queen angles, just a simple dress, and the kind of stillness that asked a room to listen. The crowd settled as if responding to an unspoken cue. "Good evening," she began, voice warm enough to carry without a microphone. "When I was 9, I wanted to live in a library. Tonight, I want to live in this room." A ripple of laughter. She went on. "Some of you know me as a CEO, but tonight I'm here as a granddaughter of a public school teacher and a daughter of a man who believed the measure of success is how many people you bring with you. We're launching the Bridge Fund scholarships and emergency grants for children from working families. Not charity. Access, not pity. Partnership." She paused, eyes finding faces in the sea, custodians in pressed shirts, baristas in their off-duty sneakers, a line of kids hugging new books. "I used to think power meant height," she said. "Now I think it means reach." Applause rose genuine and full. Gavin felt Ellie's hand slide into his. "Dad," she whispered. "This is the part where people stop being strangers." Ava continued. "There's one more thing. None of this exists without the reminder that fixed me when I didn't know I was broken. You fix things with the next thing you do." Her gaze flicked across the atrium and landed on Gavin. "This fund is our next thing." The room followed her eyes. Gavin felt the collective look and refused to drop his own. For once, the attention didn't feel like a weight. It felt like a hand. The MC returned to the mic for logistics, and Ava stepped off the stage into the wings. She didn't head for the green room. She headed for him. "Walk with me," she asked when she reached the railing. He nodded. Ellie fell easily into step. A small diplomat escorting 2 heads of state. They passed the book table where a volunteer was arranging a stack of titles Ellie had recommended. They passed the clinic where a little boy tried on glasses and blinked at a world that had finally come into focus. Backstage was calmer. Dimmer light, the hum of a generator, the soft shuffle of stagehands. Ava stopped near the curtain, the murmur of the crowd a heartbeat away. "I owe you honesty. That doesn't need a microphone," she said. "You gave that yesterday," he replied, "in the atrium." "That was policy," she said. "This is personal." He waited. Ava drew a breath like a diver. "Gavin, the day we met you were on your way to change your life, and you stopped. For a stranger. You didn't know my name and you didn't ask for anything. You just freed me and walked away. I have replayed that moment more times than I can count. Not because of the shoe." A smile ghosted her mouth. "Because of the sentence you left behind." He remembered it as if he'd said it in the last hour, not a lifetime ago. No one deserves to be left stuck like that. "I have been stuck," Ava said quietly. "In the idea that success is a height, in the fear that if I reached down someone would pull me under. Last night in that elevator, your daughter's hand in mine, I realized I wasn't reaching down, I was reaching across." Ellie's eyes shone. "That's what bridges do," she said softly. Phoebe turned to her and something unguarded flickered open. "Ellie, you are the bravest person I know who still needs a booster seat." Ellie attempted dignity and failed, giggling, and then she sobered. "Are you going to say the sentence now?" Ava looked back to Gavin, and the nerves in her hands stilled. "Yes." She stepped closer, dropping her voice to the place where truth fits. "You once gave up your chance to change your life for a stranger. Let me return the favor not with a job, but with a place in my life." Silence held like a breath. The city outside seemed to lean in. Gavin felt the old reflex rise to joke, to deflect, to protect the small piece of himself that had learned to live without asking. He didn't use it. He looked at the woman who had sung to his daughter in a dark elevator, who had learned how to apologize in public and tell the truth in private, and he let the relief feel like joy. "I don't need saving," he said gently. "I never did." "I know," she answered. "I'm asking to stand." Ellie's hand found each of theirs and tugged impatient with grown-up pacing. "They're waiting." Ava laughed, bright like the idea of summer, and wiped a thumb under Ellie's eye for a tear that hadn't fallen. "Then, let's not make them any more." They walked to the wing. The MC raised an arm toward the curtain. "And now, a small thank you to the people who reminded us why we're here." Ava's fingers curled around Gavin's. He tightened back. Ellie squeezed both hands and looked up, issuing her final directive in a whisper. "Bring her in." The curtain swept. Light flooded. The room rose. For a suspended second, all Gavin could see was brightness sound folding in like waves. Then, faces resolved, Hattie grinning. The security guard dabbing his eyes, a cluster of kids on tiptoe, a teacher with her hand over her heart, and there at the front, a tiny woman in a lavender cardigan, the one who had once brought him cookies, watching with the pride of family. Ava stepped to the mic but didn't let go of his hand. "This is Gavin Carter," she said simply. "He keeps our house standing. He reminded me that height without reach is just distance. Tonight, we choose reach." Applause broke like weather over a summer field, loud, messy, human. Ellie waved with her whole arm, then lifted their hands higher as if the three of them were one thing, which in a way they already were. When the noise ebbed, the string quartet began a gentle melody, not Gershwin, but close enough to pull a thread through the night before. Gavin leaned toward the mic, then didn't speak. He looked at Ava instead. "High chairs are for toddlers," he murmured, an old joke finding new use. "Good," she said, eyes shining, "because I'm done with heights that make me lonely." They stepped back from the edge together into a space where light didn't glare. It warmed. People pressed forward hands to shake books, to sign lives, to stitch to other lives by way of names. The three of them stayed a moment longer at the center, letting the room happen around them. Ellie tugged his sleeve. "Dad, yeah. When we go home, can we invite her for peanut butter?" Ava arched an eyebrow. "Is that part of the deal?" "It's the rule," Ellie pronounced. "If someone gives you sunshine, you don't throw it away." Ava looked at Gavin, then at the girl who had been both compass and catalyst. "Then I'm learning the rules," she said. "One jar at a time." They left the stage not as an exit but as an entrance into a future that felt for once like a road they'd chosen together. The banner above them shifted in the air from the opening doors, and for a brief perfect second the word "bridge" cast its shadow over their joined hands. Outside, the city glowed the way cities do when they remember they're made of people. In the middle of it, a father, a daughter, and a woman who had finally chosen reach walked into the night carrying nothing but what mattered and everything they needed to get home. And just like that, sometimes the bridges we build aren't made of stone or steel, but of trust, kindness, and the courage to reach across. Maybe tonight's story reminded you of someone who changed your life with a simple act. Or maybe it inspired you to be that person for someone else. Now, I'd love to know, where in the world are you listening from? Drop it in the comments so we can see just how far these stories can travel. And if this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe and join our little corner of the world where we share moments of hope, love, and second chances. Thank you truly for spending your time with me today. Until next time, keep building your bridges and keep believing that even the smallest kindness can change the ending of someone's story.